Hi, friends. It's Melissa Taylor from our Father's House of Worship. Today's devotional is on the story of Hannah and Hannah's amazing persistence and faithfulness in God and His timing. And I want to really share with you some insight on how you can bring that same kind of faith into your own life, because I really do believe that God wants the best for us. I really do believe He wants us to be fruitful and He wants us to have a great life in His will. In 1 John 5:14, it says, whatever you ask for in God's will, He hears your prayers. And so Hannah's story is really a great depiction of that promise. And before I get into the story, I just want to pose the question for all of you is how much do you trust God's timing? How much do you trust God's will and God's judgment? And that trust comes from faith in not knowing what the answers are, faith in not knowing when His timing is, faith in not knowing that there may be something better, but that He has something in store for us that we don't know, but we have to trust that God's plan is always perfect. So today I'm going to share with you just two things that you can do to become more fruitful in your life and have a little bit more trust in God. So just a quick recap on the story of Hannah. So Hannah was married to Elkanah, and Elkanah was married to Hannah as well as Peninnah. And it's suggested in some theories that maybe Elkanah was married to Peninnah because Hannah couldn't bear children and that he needed to bear children, so he did so with Peninnah. However, it was very clear in the story that Elkanah really loved Hannah. And so Hannah was barren for a time. Hannah couldn't have children. You have to think about the time period that this happened in. It was in their society as well. It was probably the worst thing that could happen to a Hebrew married woman was to be barren. And women who were barren were seen as cursed, and they were kind of shunned and cast out from society and just treated pretty poorly by other women especially. And so Peninnah was probably jealous of Hannah. We don't know, but I could speculate. She's probably jealous of Hannah because of how much is depicted, how much Elkanah loves Hannah throughout the story. And she was just flaunting her fertility around Hannah and showing off her kids around her and calling Hannah names and ridiculing her and telling her that she was cursed because she couldn't have children. It was pretty much just being very mean and bullying her. And this went on, it said, for years and years. And so she and the whole family one year went up to Shiloh to the temple to pray. Now, this was something that everybody did once a year. They would go with their families and take an animal up for sacrifice to the temple and then do their prayers. And it was almost like a pilgrimage every year that they would do. So Hannah was up there with the whole family. Peninnah was ridiculing her, flaunting around her children. And then Hannah just pretty much had a breakdown, and she had it. She went to the temple. She said, I'm going to go to the temple to pray. She went there by herself, started praying so fervently. And as Hannah's praying, she's even bargaining with God. She's like, please, God, if you just give me a child, I'll just dedicate him to you. I'll give him to you. Please just let me bear children. She was just letting it all go. That Eli, who came in, who was the high priest, saw her there and thought she was drunk. And he was like, lady, why are you at the temple drunk? And she's like, I'm not drunk. I haven't had any beer. I haven't had any wine. It's my soul is tormented. I'm sad. I'm sorrowful. She tells him her story. Eli basically prays over her, comforts her, and says to her, I really do have faith that God will give you children, which gives her a lot of hope and faith, and her faith is restored. And she leaves the temple. She starts eating again, which shows she hadn't been eating, so she was clearly going through a big struggle. And what I love about this story is not just about the blessing that Hannah eventually had, because she eventually gave birth to Samuel, who became one of the most prolific prophets of all time. And Samuel also anointed King David and Saul, and so he had this big role in the world as well. And God was really preparing her for this journey for her to birth Samuel. But what I love is that it's not just saying the outcome and the blessing that Hannah ended up having, but really also depicted her struggle and the torment that was happening to her through Penina and probably through a lot of people in their community. So Hannah was going through this deep struggle. And it said for years, it said year after year. And so she, despite all of the heartache and the pain and the despair, in the end, she was blessed and she kept her faith strong and she still kept persisting with that prayer. And I can't say that that's been the same for me, or maybe for some of you, when we've just been praying for something over and over again. Sometimes it says for years, but sometimes even after like a week or a month, I get impatient. Sometimes I'm like, God, why can't you answer this prayer, right? But sometimes God wants us to be in a place for a season. Sometimes he wants us to be single. Sometimes he wants us to be in a place of challenge to prepare us for the next blessing. Sometimes he wants us to wait. And sometimes it's a no. Sometimes it's better that we didn't get that, right? There have been so many times where I'm like, wow, I'm so glad that that prayer wasn't answered or that prayer wasn't answered. My husband, Pastor Taylor, and I were looking for a new home last year after we got married, and we were looking all over, and it was still the pandemic where a lot of people hadn't been moving, so there wasn't a lot of inventory on the market, and whatever was there, it was the rents were increased like double or 3 times even sometimes, and because of the demand. And then we would get outbid for rent. We would get outbid. People would offer $1,000 more, and our application, even though we were at the top, would be kicked out. So it was extremely frustrating, and this happened over and over again. And it was almost time for us to move. And we were like, oh no, what are we going to do? But we kept faithful, we kept strong, and we kept praying. And some of the places that we saw, there were a lot of things that were wrong with it, where we were like, I don't think that space is going to work. The kitchen's really small, or this is really old, or whatever. And there were things that we didn't really like, or weren't going to really work for our lifestyles, but we were going to compromise and just take whatever we could get to have a place to live. But God was like, no, 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 I have a better place for you in mind. And so as frustrating as it was, we stayed in that faith. And sure enough, the right place popped up in the right time, because God's timing is always perfect. And it was just what we needed. And it was better than the other places that we had in mind. And we even tell each other all the time, like, thank goodness we didn't get that place, or thank goodness, that application didn't go through, because God knew what we needed, and it was better than what we wanted. And so in the story of Hannah, we can learn so many lessons about faith. We can also learn lessons about how we treat others, and like Penina not supporting another female for something that was out of her control and just being horribly mean to her. We can learn so many things from this story, and I could really dive into this so much more, but I don't have a lot of time. So just a couple of things to think about. And these are ways to become more fruitful. So one of them is, who are your prayers serving? Who are your prayers serving? Because Hannah was praying in the beginning, was praying for herself. And I could probably imagine she may have been like, why does Penina have all these children and I don't? What's wrong with me? Why am I cursed? What did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong that made God close my womb? And it was all about her. And she probably didn't want to feel shunned in society. She probably wanted to feel like a real woman, quote unquote, right? And she was being felt not to be, or being less than. And so her prayers were probably serving herself at the time. However, it wasn't until she went to the temple and Eli was there with her, and she then started praying differently and started saying, hey, if I have a child, Lord, I will lift him up to you. I will give him to you. Now, if she hadn't prayed that, if she got the prayer answered within the first try, that may not have happened. She wouldn't have been at a place that was so desperate where she was like, God, I'll give you anything, even my child, I'll dedicate him to you. Now imagine if Samuel had not been in the role that he had been in. At the time, their world was very becoming ungodly. So, and Samuel was one of the ones who helped shift that, turn things around for their for their society into becoming a more spiritual, connected community. But what if Samuel had come around? What if she had another child? It wouldn't have been called Samuel, because Samuel was the name that she chose because she was dedicating him to God. But what if Samuel had come around at the first prayer? Maybe she would have just been like status quo, everything's fine, and just raised him as a quote unquote normal child, average kid. But instead, she went through this trial and through these tribulations to a point where she was so desperately just praying to God that just give me anything, give me a child, please. I'll do anything for you. I'll even give you my child. I'll dedicate him to your service. And that is the role that Samuel was meant for. And that is what God put in his life as a purpose. And he used Hannah to do that, but Hannah had to get to the point of giving the child to God. Now, that may not have happened if he had given her children earlier. And after Samuel was born, she had 4 more kids. So it's amazing, God was just really putting her in a season of a place where she really needed to depend on God. She really needed him. And so when you look at your prayers and what you're praying for, what are your prayers serving? Are they serving you, or are they serving God? Are they serving others? And so maybe sometimes we need to reframe what we're praying for, and learn how we can bring that connection closer to God when we're praying. And number 2, let go of the things that are separating you from God. If you have jealousy, maybe Hannah was still jealous of Peninnah. Maybe she had to let go of that jealousy. She had to just probably really just fall to her knees to come closer to God and let it all go. Maybe it was jealousy. Maybe it's other things. So what do you have to let go of that's keeping you separate from God? Maybe it's resentments. Maybe it's even guilt or shame. Whatever it is, ask God to reveal it to you. I've asked God to reveal this to me. What is separating me from you? And like that, he will reveal it to you. He's just waiting to be asked sometimes. So find out what is keeping you separate from God and how you can trust him more. Ask God, how can I trust you more? Help me with my unbelief. So like I said, there's so much in the story that I really just want to dive into so much more, but I'm going to have to stop it here. But just remember the story of Hannah and her unrelenting faith. And in order to be fruitful and have that kind of faith, we need to learn to trust God, trust his timing, and trust his judgment. So I hope that helped you, give you some encouragement today.